Hey guys, we're back. It's good to see you. Last time we ended talking about the appointment of Hitler, January 1933, as the Chancellor or the second in command of the government. Today, our topic is more about the realization of Nazi power beginning in 33. Now, one of the first things Hitler does as Chancellor, he makes this announcement that in 2 months, in March 3rd to be exact, there will be a special election for the Reichstag. He believes the numbers in the Reichstag do not really accurately portray the actual power in Germany the Nazis had. Now guys, whenever a leader, whenever a ruler calls for special elections or rules by decree, be afraid, it pretty much means they're leading as an autocratic leader. So he calls for a special election March 3rd, 1933, 7 days prior to the election. If you watch the video from last week, you know what happens next. There is a major fire that takes down the Reichstag, the actual structure in Berlin. The Reichstag burns down. They find out later on that it was a slightly deranged Dutch communist who began the fire. Of course, Hitler is going to use the link to communism as some kind of pretext for a wider plot by the Communist Party. So Hitler is going to call for a stronger control over Germany. They use the fire as a pretext to explain a wider plot by the communists. They pass a new law in 33 called the Reichstag Fire Decree of Article 48. What it does essentially, it's going to give Hitler complete authority now over a police state. It gives the Nazis and Hitler emergency powers to suppress civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of press. So it turns Germany into a police state, and it remains that way the remainder of Hitler's regime into the 40s until the time of his death. So the fire leads to them amassing more power, more authority, more control. It gets worse from here. The next month, keep in mind, we still have Hindenburg acting as the #1 man in control, the president of Germany, but again, his senility is getting worse and worse by the day. It's really now Hitler's government, okay? So in 34, we're going to see the passing of another piece of legislation known as the Enabling Act. So again, the next month they pass the Enabling Act. It's going to make Hitler the sole legislative authority in Germany. He's the only one that can make laws, break laws, enact new laws, make amendments. He's now the sole legislative force in Germany as part of the Enabling Act of 1933. So ultimately here what they do is they suspend the Weimar Republic. The folks in the Reichstag actually vote to suspend themselves for the next 4 years. It's a suspension that turns into closer to 15 years. It goes well into the 40s as well. So the Enabling Act. As part of this, what happens? They're going to end the police force. There's no more police force going forward. No police force. Additionally, there's no more political parties besides the Nazis. No police force. No political parties besides the Nazis. No labor unions. No more labor unions. And no more court system. So right now this government's getting very, very scary and autocratic by 1933. So guys, today, the remainder of the day, understand that we're talking here largely about a term known as Glacialtag. Glacialtag. It's a big umbrella term called Glacialtag, but it means German or Nazi coordination. Hitler wants to coordinate every element of life in Nazi Germany. So Glacialtag, kind of a funny word, again, means coordination. You spell Glacialtag, Gleichschaltung, Glacialtag. Now, Glacialtag is actually helped along by the fact that in 1934, who passes away finally, well into his 80s. Hindenburg finally dies, and we're going to see now, without a president, you still have your Chancellor Hitler. Hitler's like, you know what? You don't need a president any longer. I'm going to fuse together these two titles, President and Chancellor, into one new title created only for me. The new title, which means leader in German, is Führer. So Führer, F-U-H-R-E-R, is his new title, meaning leader, as of 1934. Let's go back now to this idea of glacial tongue. How does glacial tongue take place or take root in Germany under the Nazi regime? First of all, there is an economic component to glacial tongue, okay? One example of this is the creation of a philosophy known as pump priming. So pump priming, two words, simply means building projects, okay? So it means the implementation of new building projects with the idea of getting Germans working again, trying to cut back or cut into unemployment. People are happier when they're working, obviously. So if you're, for example, a fan of Roman history, it's not too far off what Augustus did during his times as leader of Rome, as well as Caesar. Okay, building projects to cease or limit unemployment. An example of pump priming would be the creation, the development, the building in the 30s of the Autobahn, this massive highway system, north, south, east, west, still there today. The Autobahn, example of pump priming. He also had his engineers working in the creation of a new automobile that, today kind of represents a carefree, frivolous, happy lifestyle, but it was created by the Nazi Germans back in the 30s, the VW Bug. Also an example of engineering, design work, and labor, people working, more pump priming during this time period. So other examples of glacial tongue, and again, it just means coordinating every element of life in Germany. Another example could be the creation of the Nazi Youth. The Nazi Youth, again, the notion here was to put a program in place that would teach Nazi values and ideologies and philosophies to the young people of Germany, the young boys of Germany. For the girls, they create the German Girls Association. So the German Girls Association, the Nazi Youth, it's just a way for them to put in place the values that they saw as being the future of new Germany during this time period. So moving along, guys, I want to go to a different direction right now, or in a different direction. So a big part of glacial tongue is a really, really insidious, dark, evil component that has to do with the persecution of their ethnic, racial, and political enemies. So let's talk about a little bit of this right now, how the Nazis began to weed out those they deemed to be undesirables. So 1933, we're going to see the creation of a new, really the first of the work camps known as Dachau. So Dachau was designed and built in 1933, D-A-C-H-A-U. I was there briefly when I was in my 20s, about 20 miles outside of the city of Munich. Dachau, not a death camp, that comes later, but it's a work camp. Initially, Dachau in 33, 34 was a place where they sent people they deemed to be Catholic or communist or far left wing or social democrats or homosexuals. So again, those they deemed to be undesirable were sent to Dachau. One more element of glacial tongue. I want to focus now for a little bit on definitely the most infamous chapter, or one of them, A Stain on Humanity in the 20th Century, the initial persecution of the Jewish population of Germany. Began in 1933 under Hitler, Understand that they were definitely introducing educationally information that was helping to craft or shape the minds of the young people of this country. So they really believed this stuff, and they were, making sure that young people followed along. For example, in the 30s, a new piece of educational literature known as the poisonous mushroom was made to be customary, compulsory educational reading in German schools. All kids read the poisonous mushroom. And the idea was that the German Jew was a person to be afraid of. And like a poisonous mushroom, unless you pick that mushroom out, it will populate and grow and further. So the idea was they had to pick these mushrooms. So definitely a major part of their pedagogy during this time period was teaching these kids to fear the Jewry of this country. So in 33, they're going to implement, the Nazis do, an economic boycott. An economic boycott of the Jewish businesses in this land. And they stationed Nazi troops, members of the SA predominantly, outside of German business or Jewish businesses, be it a butcher shop or a bank or a mercantile store. So you were strongly encouraged to boycott a Jewish business. And if you didn't, you were also probably beaten up and left for dead. So a boycott economically of their businesses cuts right to the heart of their quality of life. In addition, they're going to limit their educational possibilities. A new law in 33 also says that any German college could only have a Jewish enrollment of 1.5%. The rest had to be Gentile. So 1.5%. They take it a step further. You could not run for public office as a Jew. You could not be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, certainly, if you were Jewish. So this is all in 33. It began anew about during that time period. Now we're going to see a little bit later, 1935, things get a little bit more intensified. Okay, 1935, if you watch the video again, they reference what's called the Nuremberg Laws. 1935, the Nazis or Hitler passes autocratically the Nuremberg Laws. And in essence, what it does is it makes the German Jew a subject of Germany and no longer a citizen. They strip their rights as citizens. They're going to say, in addition, that, as a Jew in this land, you cannot have sexual relations or marry a Gentile. They're going to say, in addition, that, really they change your name. They take away your original birth name. They give you a Jewish sounding name for purposes of identification. You're forced to register with the government. They want to know where you are, where you live, so they can take you away, perhaps to a work camp or a death camp in the future. So again, just to recap that, no sexual activity. You're forced to register with the government. They change your name as well. You are made to be a subject and no longer a citizen by the Nuremberg Laws. How do they decide what is a Jew? And that's very murky as well, according to Nazi propaganda and their information. What they said back then was that if you had 3 out of 4 grandparents that were Jewish, you were Jewish. However, if you had 2 grandparents that were Jewish and you attended synagogue, you were Jewish. If you were married to a Jew, you were Jewish. So it was a little bit complex and murky and ambiguous, but it does go, it all aims at more stringent persecution of the Jewish population of this land. Speaking of the Nazi interpretation of undesirables, over time, Hitler began to express some concern about the growing power of the SA. Remember the brown shirts from the early 20s, those thugs at Nazi rallies? He believed that Hitler did, that the SA, the brown shirts, had gotten too powerful. Way too big of a group, too powerful. And maybe also they were a little bit more liberal, a little bit more Catholic, and also there was this perception that maybe the SA had some maybe a subcurrent of homosexuality within the group. They were led by a former friend and now rival, a man named Ernst Röhm. Ernst Röhm, R-O-H-M, was leading the SA, R-O-H-M. So what all this leads to is what's called the Night of the Long Knives. 1934, one night, one evening, Hitler is going to order the the liquidation of the SA. They're going to purge from within. They kill their own people. Approximately 1,000 Nazis are going to die, are purged, and they liquidate the SA as a group on this one night, the Night of the Long Knives. So Röhm dies, many other leaders of the SA die, and also the rank and file. So who replaces then the SA as a new important tool in Hitler's apparatus of hate? The SA is replaced by the SS. So the SS largely carries out the extermination of the SA, and they replace them as well. So the SS is a smaller, tighter, more elite group. Okay, it began as an elite bodyguard or body corps, elite corps for Hitler in the mid-20s. So they were the black shirts, they were elite, they were a protection squad or bodyguards for Hitler beginning in 1935. They wore all black, they wore, skull and crossbone pins on their hats as well. They were led by the face of evil, a man named Heinrich Himmler. Again, one of Hitler's band of losers. Heinrich Himmler, Himmler, heads up the SS. Going forward, their role was extreme political tasks and covert assassinations. So Himmler leads the new SS that replaced the SA following the Night of the Long Knives. I want to shift gears here for a moment and give you a bit of a segue into our next lecture. So 1934 becomes a pivotal year for what I like to call a diplomatic revolution. 34, looking at things diplomatically in Germany and in Europe, they're now going to sort of shift gears a little bit here, and the worm has turned, so to speak, in terms of German power and perception in Europe. In 34, we're going to see again a diplomatic revolution, and it begins with a very well-known moment. In 1934, there was a conference held in the city of Geneva, Switzerland, known as the Geneva Disarmament Convention. The Geneva Disarmament Convention or Conference. At this meeting, all the powers to be, all the major nations in Europe are there. France and England and Spain and Germany is there as well, talking about the eventual disarmament of Europe and arms reduction and cutting back on warfare. We're going to have intellectual discourse and no more war. That was the idea. So Germany is there, and it's very much orchestrated and in unison. As the French began to give their speech, their presentation, Hitler stands up with all of his cronies there at one table. They all stand up and they file out together during the speech. So it became big news in Europe, and it was a very strong symbolic statement that we are not disarming, we're actually going to be rearming and becoming a major force in Europe going forward militarily. The next month, this is my last point for today, the next month Hitler announces 3 major decisions and changes that go directly against the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. So 3 things. Number 1, he announces that Germany will now have conscription. We are introducing or announcing the draft or conscription, well over the 100,000 men that was put in place by the Treaty of Versailles. Number 1 was the draft. Number 2, they're going to introduce, Hitler does, what's called the Luftwaffe, simply the German Air Force. Again, against Versailles. They introduce the Luftwaffe or the new German Air Force. And number 3, they fought like mad to be admitted to this group back in 25 at Locarno. Hitler announces, we're not too impressed with the League of Nations. We are going to be leaving the League of Nations immediately. Okay, they leave the League of Nations. They see it as a weak organization and a tool of the Allies, namely the French and the English. Okay, we'll pick it up next time with growing German militarism in the 1930s. Have a great day, and thank you again. Bye-bye. Oh, 20 minutes. Thanks, son.